Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 2023 research seminar, Technology and AI, Translators, Friend or Foe. As you know, this event is run by the Linguistics and Translation and Interpreting Group at UNSW Sydney, and we continue today the topic of our previous seminar on translation technology. I am Ludmila Stern, Professor of Interpreting and Seminar Convener. I'm assisted by my colleague, Professor Sandra Hale, who doesn't need an introduction, I'm sure. And this seminar is recorded. Now, I'm delighted to welcome our very numerous audience. In fact, we have oversubscribed today. And so welcome those who managed to join us also from interstate and overseas and different time zone. I'm speaking today from my home on Gadigal land, and it is a privilege for me, who is originally a migrant to Australia, to be living and working on this beautiful land. And I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, their many languages and cultures, and I pay tribute to elders past, present, and emerging. And I also acknowledge and pay my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So now, please allow me to introduce our four speakers. As you probably realize, today we have four speakers because this seminar is run as a panel discussion with expert colleagues. So our first speaker is Ms. Alisa Tian, who is an associate lecturer, a NAATI certified translator and interpreter, SBS subtitler, and a PhD student. Alisa, maybe you could wave to us so that everybody could see you. Yeah, thank you. Mr. Jiayun is a PhD candidate and as CATI certified translator and interpreter, and a NAATI certified translator. He was a lecturer in his native China. Mr. Chang, associate lecturer, also NAATI certified translator and interpreter and practicum coordinator. And Professor Stephen Doherty, educator, researcher, and associate dean education of the Faculty of Arts, Design, and Architecture. And I will moderate this session. So each panelist is going to speak for about 5 or 7 minutes with perhaps a follow-up question. The presentations will be followed by a Q&A and open to the audience. So you can post your questions in chat. So let me begin with you, Alisa. Alisa, you are an experienced translator, an SBS subtitler, and an educator. So what can you tell us about your personal experience with translation technology as a user and educator?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Ludmila. So as Ludmila said, I am a practitioner, researcher, and teacher of translation and interpreting. But my sharing today would be more from a practitioner's point of view. So I just like to make it very clear that as a practitioner, my general attitude towards machine translation or technology is that I see it as a powerful assistant. I don't see it as my competitor. I'm not trying to compete with machine translation. Of course, I can translate better than machine. I'm sure you can do that too. To me, it's more a tool that can help me to do my job better. And having said that, I realized that it is very hard to change the way we work. So when I started training in translation, there's no technology, or the technology was not good enough to be used. But it's changing very fast, and it's very different from the way it was 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago when I started training. So right now, from what I experienced, mainly from subtitling at SBS, so we've tried machine translation with different genres of programs. And we find that the use of machine varies in different genres. So the more scripted, the better quality it is. So for example, a few years ago, we were trialing machine translation in one of the dating show. It was supposed to be a very funny program from Chinese into English. And I was checking the machine translation. And my experience was that I had to spend more time correcting the machine's translation than I was doing it on my own. So that wasn't very successful. But as we go, we found that machine is getting better and better. And for programs that are highly scripted, like the one I'm doing now, Dateline, and for example, Child Genius Australia, it's scripted and machine's doing really well. So I guess the question now, is not whether we will be replaced by machine, but, what machines can do and what machines cannot do at this stage. So that's what I'm more, interested in. So in my experience, what I like about machine, there are mainly three things I really like about it. So the first is reliability in terms of technical aspects. So numbers, dates, address, things like that. Right. So now I don't have to think about it, how to translate. The machine, gives me answer, in 1 second. So that's great. And it's reliable. They won't make mistakes, 99.9% of the time. And another thing I really like about machine is the fast turnover time. It does things really quick. So for example, this show I'm working on at SBS Insight, before we use machine translation, we will split each episode to 2 translators. And it took about 2-3 weeks for each translators to finish the first half and the second half. And, when it got returned, we need another checker to check. So another 1 week. So one episode takes about 4 weeks to finish. But now it's aired every week. And it took me 2 days to review the machine generated subtitles, 2 days versus 4 weeks. So that's a big change. And that's what I really like about machine translations as well. And what that means is that, if you think about SBS audience, right? So people like my mother, who is a 60-year-old retiree who doesn't speak English, right? So because, we can produce more shows in a more time-efficient manner, people like my mom can watch SBS, more shows, more programs, and they feel more included in this society we're in. So that's what I really like as well. It promotes inclusion, so more people can have access to mainstream programs, so they don't have to rely on social media, with crazy ideas and, fake news. Having said that, there are some things that I can see that machine is not doing very well, or, I don't really like. So first is register. So the degree of formality. I do find that machines mixed up formality. So, I'm speaking to you in a very, relaxed, casual kind of manner, but the machine may interpret that and do it like a written kind of formal language. And another thing that I noticed is that the machine tend to normalize languages. So you will see that me and then Jia and Chang and Stephen, we all speak in different styles, right? But, the machine kind of translate that into one standard normalized kind of style. And when it comes to stylistic features like fillers, hedges, right, tones, machines is just not that sensitive. So as audience, you may not get to feel what the speaker's original style is, right? And that's what I don't like about machine. And so what I think, as a researcher is that, for researcher, I really like to see more rigorous research onto what machines can do and what it cannot do. So then, I can understand what my value is as a human translator. Like I said, I'm not trying to compete with machine, but I do want to know that what's my value, what I can do. And, for educators, I think what I really like to know is, how can we ensure that students' mental muscles are developed as well, when they are introduced to machine translation, because, we tend to rely on technology, right? And I was lucky when I was trained, there's no machine or not much machine involved. So I had to train my mental muscles to be a professional translators. But now that with machines, how can we do that with the current students? So that's something, I would like to find out. So, just to conclude, as a practitioner, I really like working with machine translation. It helps me do my job faster, easier, right? So I can produce more shows for more people in this community. But I'm also aware of its limitations, and I would like to see more limitations from research, and I would like to see more research on translator education, how we can incorporate technology in teaching translation these days. So that's my sharing, and I will hand back to Ludmila.
Thank you. Thank you, Alisa. Very interesting what you said about subtitling, because there is a perception, rightly or wrongly, that when it gets to creative texts, machine translation is pretty useless. But so you've shed an interesting light on how machine translation is used in subtitling. So you sort of answered what I was going to ask you as a follow-up question. It's about the implications for education. Have you personally used technology when training students?
So I haven't used technology in training, because the courses I'm involved in do not require much technology. But I do notice that some of my students use technology. And I find that, again, this is not through research, so it's not evidence-based, it's my observation, so personal experience and observation. And I do find that some students tend to rely on technology, so they don't think on their own. Like I said, it's like humans tend to do that, right? So sorry, Ludmila.
No. So are you saying that they will use something like, let's say, Google Translate, and then just leave it as a final product?
Some students do that. Most students would tell me that they have used machine translation at some sentences they found it very difficult to translate, and they want to discuss with me what we think about this machine generated translation, and that's fine. That's fine. And that also reminds me of the skill of critical thinking, right? And resilience and focus. This skills that are required to be a professional translator. So that's as an educator, I think this is more important that whether the profession will be replaced by machine.
Yeah. Thank you, Alisa. So I'm now asking Jiayun. Jiayun, if you could. We'll continue the topic that Alisa started, and you have used translation technology extensively in your teaching back at home, and your PhD is dedicated to post-editing in translation technology. So could you tell us a bit what we learn from research and your practice about the efficacy of post-editing machine translation on the translation process and product in training? And how do you see the future of translation training?
Thank you, Ludmila. I have a simple slide to show you. Hello, everyone. My name is Chang, as Ludmila introduced. I'm from China. I've been teaching in China for around 10 years, and I've practiced as a certified translator in China for over 15 years. And I've recently got my NATI certificate. But most importantly, I am a PhD candidate right now. So today my sharing will be from the perspective of a student and also a trainer. I actually will continue what Alisa has mentioned just now, how students actually use technology in learning translation. So, and then I will highlight two issues of concern for discussion or consideration. Based on my observation, I actually noticed that students have been accessing translation technology or that AI tool in three different ways. So the first way, I call them wholesale users. So these students, they use a tool to generate an output and then use it wholly in the tasks. I think Alisa has mentioned some students will just submit machine-generated translation or an AI-generated essay directly to the teacher. So this is basically the first way how they will interact with machine translation or AI tool. And the second one, I call them intermediate user. So these students, they will use technology to generate a rough output. And then they will develop or improve the output with human intervention. Post-editing is a good example. So they will use the output of machine-generated translation, then they will correct manually the errors in the output. And they might even change some of the expressions that they don't think are good enough. And another example is that with AI tool this day, when they want to write an essay, they might ask AI tool to generate an essay, but instead of using the output directly, they use some other tools or they manually paraphrase everything in the essay before submission. So this is the second type of user. And the third type of user, I call them critical users. These students, they have the ability to evaluate the output of machine and technology, and they will decide selectively how to go along with it, how to use it. For example, when they use machine translation, they will first of all evaluate the quality of machine translation before using it. They will even evaluate the context to see whether in this specific context, machine translation is applicable or not. And then when they are translating, instead of doing post-editing, maybe they are using machine translation only as a reference. They know that machine translation is most of the time generated by some kind of frequency, which means the translation might be too normal or ordinary, too commonplace. So they will purposefully avoid using the expressions in machine translation, and they try to look for something new and something better. I think similarly, when we are using AI tools, we can do the same, because AI-generated essays might be normal. They might be only at the pass level, not the outstanding level, at the pass level like 70 or 80 out of 100. And then some students, instead of using the essay directly, they will actually learn from this generated essay some useful expressions and also the structure. They will also pay attention to the arguments, but they might not use those arguments. They will use the opposite argument so that the essay will stand out among all the other ordinary arguments. And another good example is that when we are interacting with AI tool, it's very important that we should know how to interact with them, like to use effective prompts. And this day, I even see that some people are saying there will be a new job called prompt writer, because sometimes AI tools don't provide the answer we want. It's not because it's not smart enough. It's just because we don't use the right cue, the right prompts for it to provide the right answer. And that's why it's also very important to learn how to write effective prompts to get the right answer for us. So those are the three types of users based on my observation. And then among the three types of users, I would actually like to bring to your attention two issues of concern. So the first one is that I believe we will eventually all be replaced by machine. I believe that, but it's just this kind of change will not happen overnight. It takes time. For example, machine translation has been developing for more than 5 decades or even more, but then it hasn't yet fully replaced human. And even though this technology is mature enough to replace human, it still needs time to permeate in society. Like just like mobile phone, even though it's good enough, it still needs a decade for everyone to actually have a mobile phone. So that's why I think this kind of change will not happen overnight. It will happen gradually. Some of us will be replaced sooner. Some of us will be replaced later. Yeah. So among these 3 types of user, I think the first type of user is the one at the highest risk to be replaced, because obviously the second type and the third type user, they have more capability in themselves, or more ability of their own to translate and also to interact with machine translation. Yeah. So that's the first issue I would like you to pay attention to. As a student and also as a trainer, I would want to learn more about the technology, but in the meantime, I will enhance my own capabilities so that even though one day we will be replaced, I am not the first one to be replaced. Maybe before my retirement, I will still have my job. The second issue I would like to bring is the ethical use of technology. And I would like to put this ethical use of technology in the context of education instead of in the industry, because in the industry, it's more about achieving goals. It's about the work results serve the purpose well. But then in the context of teaching and learning, the issue of ethics, it's actually more complicated, because we not only want students to produce high quality works, but we also want them to demonstrate their ability, their originality, creativity. We want them to have their voices in their assignments. So in this context of teaching and learning, the issue of ethics is actually more complicated, because students and teachers might not have the same understanding towards this issue. For example, students might think it's okay to submit a post-edited machine translation as an assignment for the teacher. But then the teacher might not want it, because they want, in that specific assignment, the teacher might want students to show their creativity. And machine translation might kill creativity to a certain extent. Or another example, if they use AI tool to generate an essay, I've actually talked with some of my former students, and the other day I'm also discussing this issue with my lab mates. It turns out that as students, they think it's okay to paraphrase AI-generated essays. But then as teachers, I might view it as some kind of ethical behavior, because in the end, the ideas are not the students. They are actually borrowing the ideas from AI and use their own words to express them. So the idea and the originality are somehow lost in this process. Yeah, so that's why I think the second, of course, here in this context, the first type of user, it's always unethical, because they are not contributing to the assignment. And then the third type of user are mostly ethical. What's more controversial here is the second type of user. And my suggestion for students here is that first, before they engage with machine translation or AI tools, it's always good to check with their teachers whether they are allowed to use machine translation or AI tools. And second, if they are allowed to use it, it's always good to make an acknowledgement in the assignment saying that they have used AI tools and which type of AI tool they have used and how they are using it. Yeah, so those are the 2 issues of concern I would like to bring to your attention. I hope I've given you some food for thought. Thank you. Back to you, Rumila.
Thank you, Jia. And you can, well, let's keep the slide for a moment. So I just had a couple of follow-up questions. What is your view about the optimum time of introducing technology to translation students? If it starts too early, what impact will it have on the students? Would it be positive or negative?
This is actually what I try to focus on in my PhD studies. I think there are no consensus as to when translation technology should be introduced to students at this point. On the one hand, we have seen researchers arguing that they shouldn't be taught to students at the early stage of translator training. And that's why we've been seeing that most of the translation technology courses these days are offered to students at postgraduate level only, or at to students towards the end of undergraduate study. We've also seen that in empirical studies investigating the impact of machine translation or other type of translation technology, researchers are most of the time targeting or recruiting postgraduate students only. That means they are not even investigating whether machine translation are having and other type of translation technology are having a positive or negative impact on undergraduate students or those students at the early stage of translator training. So this is one side of the story. They think it's not appropriate to introduce it too early, mainly because some of those researchers believe that if we introduce too early, it might have an impact on the development of their translation competence. And the second is that they think some of those technologies are so difficult to master, so they have to be taught later until the students are more mature. They will have the ability to understand the technology better. But I don't totally agree with those researchers, because I believe that the younger generations are really good with technologies. Like an age 4 or 5 can already play with their mobile phone even better than an adult. So it's not an issue that the technology is too difficult for students to master. So that's one side of the story. And on the other side of the story is that there are also some researchers trying to experiment introducing translation technology earlier to students. However, what's sad is that most of those studies are not done in the field of translation studies. That means translation scholars are a little bit conservative. They don't want to experiment in introducing translation technology to students at the early stage. Most of the research are actually done outside translation studies in language teaching and learning, or even in the broad area of English learning or other type of language learning of not just language major students, but for everyone. There's even scholars advocating machine translation literacy, saying that everyone should have the basic literacy to use machine translation. For example, everyone should know when machine translation is applicable, under what kind of context machine translation is more applicable. Yeah. So to conclude, there is no consensus. In terms of translation study, researchers are more conservative. We don't want to teach translation technology too early, but outside translation studies, there are more studies done introducing technology to the general public or language major student. And personally, my project will try to experiment at the early stage of translator training. And hopefully in the years to come, I can provide you some empirical evidence to say that, yeah, it's okay to introduce it early to students.
Thank you. And we'll look forward to the findings in your research.
Thank you.
I also want to highlight the interesting points about the ethical use of technology, the risk of being replaced, and the way translation students paraphrase the product of AI as a form of plagiarism, I suppose, or cover up plagiarism. But this is also something that we are going to discuss a little bit later. So thank you again, Jia. And we are now going to make a slight transition in our discussion, focusing more on the role of AI in practice and education. And so I'm inviting my colleague Chang. Chang, so you are an educator and practitioner with a particular interest and expertise in technology. So what is the potential for AI for translation and the training of translators?
Thank you, Ludmila. So I would also like to share my screen. Just give me one moment. Hi, everyone. My name is Chang. I'm one of the staff members in the Master of Translation and Interpreting program at UNSW. So I teach a number of courses, including translation technology. So my presentation today is about exploring generative AI technology for T&I learning and teaching. So in my presentation, I would just like to quickly focus on the very practical side of the application and my experimentation of the latest AI technology. So in this presentation, I will identify some issues from my teaching practice, and I investigated whether AI can help with some of the issues. I will demonstrate some results of my experiments with the AI, and I will also like to share my takeaways and some things for everyone to consider. Now, as a translation and interpreting trainer, a lot of time the work is in the background, preparing classes and developing material, designing activities and things like that. So the major learning and teaching activities includes translation material developments. So finding authentic source text for translation, different levels of complexity, different styles and text types. Challenges include very time-consuming searches of authentic texts, and also thinking about copyrights. All right, there are oftentimes copyright concerns, and also fit for purpose, whether those texts are fit for students at trainee levels, and if they are not well versed with a lot of basic translation techniques and mindsets. So my questions in regards to this one is, can I generate more text quickly for students to practice with AI? Are the texts any good? Can I generate different types of text according to different requirements? And in terms of interpreting materials development, it's more demanding. It includes dialogue writing, authentic monologue source text in different languages for side translation, consecutive and simultaneous interpreting practice, recording of monologues in different languages for students to practice. So it's also a huge time sink, especially when it comes to dialogue writing. And there are also, when it comes to different multimedia materials, there are also copyright concerns when you use it in class or disseminate it to students. There's also fit for purpose concerns. When we need to do recordings, there's a huge hassle of finding people to do the recordings, and also finding the right speech styles. All right, so the pace of the speech and enunciation and pronunciation and things like that. And so my questions are, can I generate dialogues, even bilingual dialogues with AI? Can I define the requirements of dialogues? Are the dialogues any good? Can I generate different speech texts in different languages for monologue interpreting practice? Can I use AI to turn those speeches into audio file? If yes, are they any good? And lastly, in terms of assessment and feedback, usually that involves task analysis and preparation. And then you have translation assessment and feedback and interpreting assessment and feedback. So challenges are also, there's no shortcuts to it. So you have to review all the translation and also all the interpreting performance tasks. So they are naturally time consuming. But with a larger number of students, sometimes when it comes to translation assessment, it could be quite repetitive and boring. And when it comes to interpreting, when you don't have a transcript of the student's performance, and oftentimes you need to you need to pay very close attention to every single word they utter, and sometimes you need to listen to the recording back and forth to find, where exactly are the errors and all those kind of things. So it's quite draining. It's like you're doing the interpreting job yourself oftentimes. And so my questions, of course, I'm not expecting AIs to replace me as an assessor, but how can I use AI creatively to add value to human assessment and feedback? So that's my investigation. Now, so for translation materials, so the AI tool that I'm using is the GPT-4, which is the latest iteration of this powerful generative AI. So when it comes to text creation, that's what I did. So I asked the AI, I said, please write an article of 300 words about biosecurity of beekeeping, bee pollination, potential threat to bee population in Australia. And then it gave me a nicely written article, which is quite good. But I think that it's still a bit, general. It looks like a general introduction or a general information of things. If I want to use it for example, specialized translation practice, then I need a bit more complexity. So I added an instruction and said, can you make the content more technical, include some jargons and industry-specific terms for professional audience? And then it starts to change, and it changed it to mitigating threats to Apis mellifera and I think this one's a native pollinators. And then you will see that there are a lot more technical terms and kind of technical knowledge involved when it comes to the expression, and the expression is a bit more formal and also become a bit more challenging. And then I said, from the new text above, please extract all technical terms, paraphrase them into general terms or expressions for laymen, list them in a table format. And immediately GPT-4 listed all the terms here and give it a paraphrase or expression. Okay, so this, you can see that it's quite capable. And then I also tried it in Chinese. All right, so my working language is Chinese and English. I use Chinese, say, okay, write a 300 words short text about land rehabilitation or land reclamation after mining. So I said this is to be used in a forum, industry forum for professional audiences, and needs to talk about the latest technology and also international experience, and that's what it gave me. It's actually quite good. I was also able to ask it to list all the Chinese term, depending on how you see it. They might not be term, depending on different persons. And then you can see that I also asked it to translate it into English, and so that you can have a look. You can see what's the content is about. So it has quite a level of technicality in it. So the takeaway from this experiment is that GPT can effectively generate meaningful text in multiple languages for translation practice. Length, complexity, text types, and styles can be defined by giving more specific prompts. So I like to echo Jia's mentioned before, when you use this kind of technology, you need to be very specific on what you're asking it to do, all right? And then there shouldn't be any copyright concerns because it's an AI-generated text, so it's not from any proprietary sources. With that, I can generate many different texts in a short amount of time for students for students to practice. But there are things to be aware of. So generated texts are good for generic translation practice, but they cannot fully represent the real text in the market. All right. So it's there's no replacement if you kind of borrow text from a real job, and then it comes with all those contextual, scenarios and, specification and requirements and situations and things like that. There's no replacement of that. And also the truthfulness of the content cannot be taken for granted due to the potential hallucination of AI nowadays. So due diligence should be exercised to fact check the content when necessary. If you think the content is very important and you have to make sure that the content is accurate, then you need to fact check the content. And then students should be advised not to take the knowledge presented in the text for granted if they are not fact checked. So they can use it for translation practice, focus on the linguistic aspect of things, but not the knowledge part. So you need to be more careful with that. Now let's look at the interpreting material development. So this is when it gets a little bit more interesting. So dialogue generation. So dialogue takes a lot of time to develop, especially if we want to, develop something that resemble, Nazi exams and all those complexities with length requirements and, terminologies and things like that. So this is what I put into GPT-4. I said, write a dialogue based on the following scenario and requirements. A marketing representative from Australian Wine Export Council is meeting a visiting liquor distributor from China who is interested in importing Australian wine to the city of Chengdu in China. Each dialogue segment should have a length of 30 to 50 words. The total length of the dialogue should be around 350 words to 400 words. The dialogue should include at least 10 technical terms or jargons that are commonly used in the wine industry in Australia and liquor distribution business. So that's what it gave me. You will see that it's actually quite good. You will see this, if you take a few seconds to have a look at some of the segments, you can see that it does include quite a bit of a knowledge in terms of wine in it, especially the different types of wines and the names, the brands and things like that. And after that, I'll show you another example. So this is a monolingual dialogue, which is quite effective. If you have that, you can build upon that and then turn it into different languages, of course. And then I'll see, can I just ask it to generate bilingual dialogue directly instead of doing a monolingual one? So that's what I asked it to do. I put in even more detailed instruction. I said, write another dialogue based on following requirements. A Chinese-speaking patient, Mr. Wang, is discussing his physiotherapy program with his physiotherapist, Dr. Johnson, after an operation of his fractured hip. Mr. Wang is a chef. He slipped and fell onto the kitchen floor and broke his hip. He is the sole provider for his family, so he would like to recover and get back to work as soon as possible. Dr. Johnson explains how the rehabilitation works. Most dialogue segments should be at least 30 to 40 words long. Segments less than 30 words, if any, should be no more than 2 segments. Each speaker should have should have one long segment that contains 70 to 80 words. The total length of the dialogue should be around 400 to 450 words. The patient, Mr. Wang's segment should be written in Chinese. Please make up some background story information about his family, his work, and his concerns. Dr. Johnson's segment should be written in English. The dialogue should include at least 10 to 15 medical terms or jargons that are related to physiotherapy, anatomy, medicine, or anything related to the rehabilitation. All right, so that's the prompt that I gave it. And then it actually wrote a dialogue like that. That was actually quite good if you can understand Chinese. So I actually put in some, acting in it as the patient and in regards to his concern about getting back to work and things like that. And then I asked it to extract all the technical terms, and then it gave me a list of technical terms like that. And then I asked it to write a speech. So this one is very similar to the translation text generation. So I said, write a speech about Medicare system in Australia, 200 words. This is an informative speech for new migrants to Australia. And then you will see that this one is actually quite good. It covers most of the essential information about Medicare in Australia for migrants, and then it actually has a tone of this kind of information session. The presenter trying to convey this message to the migrants, say, okay, welcome, and then you have to know this, and then this is what you need to do, and I hope you have a healthy and prosperous life in Australia, or something like that. And then I asked it to write similar speech in Chinese. You will see that this is another piece on how to what's the procedure of seeing a doctor in Australia. So it's also for the migrants. So it wrote a quite personable speech. So I had also converted into audio, AI audio. I'll play it for you shortly. But the takeaways from this experiment is that it's surprising how capable GPT-4 is of creating dialogues from scratch, even bilingual ones. Dialogue parameters can be defined by detailed prompts, and similar to translation text generation, GPT-4 is very capable of speech writing. Things to be aware of. So dialogues could be and should be further edited to fit the Australian context. So more specific background information can be added and should be added if you want to use that for materials preparation. Again, similar to the translation material development, truthfulness of speech content cannot be taken for granted. Fact check when necessary. Students should be advised materials are for practice, not for knowledge acquisition, if facts are not properly checked. Okay, so I would like to show you some AI-generated recording of the speech, of the English speech. The first one is from the platform 11 Labs. So it's a very powerful platform that generates almost, very, very natural, human voice. But it's mostly American accent, so you can have a listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Australia. Today, I am here to inform you about one of the most crucial aspects of our nation, the Australian Medicare system. As new migrants, it is essential for you to understand how it works, as it will.
So this one sounds very natural, and if I don't tell you this is an AI voiceover, you almost don't know this is a machine voice, all right? There's no human behind it. And this one has Australian accent. This is from the Microsoft's engine inside a video editing tool called ClipChamp.
Gentlemen, welcome to Australia. Today, I am here to inform you about one of the most crucial aspects of our nation, the Australian Medicare system. As new migrants, it is essential for you to understand how it works, as it will be a key element in maintaining your health and well. So this one is less natural. It's a little bit more robotic, but it's good enough. You can actually choose a lot of different accents from that application. And interestingly, in Chinese, it also has a lot of accent, even Cantonese or Shanghainese and those kind of way of speaking. And I chose a northeastern accent. It's actually very, very natural for the the how to see a doctor speech.
尊敬的新移民朋友们，大家好。今天我要给大家介绍在澳洲看病的一般流程，希望这些信息能帮助大家在澳洲的生活更加便利。首先，如若感觉身体不适，请提前预约家庭医生。
So this one is very, very natural. So if you speak Chinese, if you're a native Chinese speaker, you'll find that this is almost indistinguishable from a real Northeastern Chinese accent. All right. Lastly, when it comes to assessment feedback, I actually used this one in one of my lectures. So we had a challenge for students to rewrite a very technical CT chest report into a simpler form so that they can understand these medical terms. And then the GPT helped extract all the technical terms and make it into layman terms. And then it was able to rewrite it into a very easily understood report and use proper kind of intonation and even use second person pronoun, your lung and blah blah blah, and it makes it very, very easy to read. So that gave me an idea when it comes to assessing translations. So for example, I try out a piece of translation homework from before. So this is one of our Chinese to English translations of products, description. So this is a student's translation. And then I said, please identify any problems with the translation, including mistranslation, grammar errors, syntax errors, spelling errors, unneeded method usage, and provide suggestions for revision and list them in the table format. But unfortunately, I think it didn't do a very good job, but it pointed out a couple of utterances. So you can see that the limitation, the machine still cannot fully, understand meaning like human beings. All right, so understand meaning like human being. Based on the previous one that I showed you in terms of rewrite, I actually say, oh, please rewrite the translation to make it suitable for promoting sales, so keep the details of the product. And then it actually gave me a very usable, a text. You can see that. So introducing the herbalist clarifying mask, your ultimate solution for all control hydration and deep cleansing with generous 80 ml volume. And this mask is designed to review your skin's natural radiance and vitality infused with blah, 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 all those kind of things. So this is actually useful because I think this can gave students a very, a reference of text that if you want to say, okay, this text has certain elements of promotion in it, all right? So how do you write it in English? How do you write promotion in English? So this is a good example, how it constructs the sentences, how it makes it appealing to the audience and all those kind of things. There's a lot of things that you can actually use to help students to improve their translation, especially when English is not their native tongue. So the takeaways are GPT-4 cannot check the meaning transfer of translation, but it can provide some feedback on grammar usage in English, not sure in other languages. GPT-4 is good at extracting terms and providing explanation and paraphrases. Asking GPT-4 to rewrite the translation could provide useful insights and suggestion. And GPT-4 cannot replace human assessor and feedback, but could add value to the process if used properly. Lastly, conclusion, I would say from this experiment, my conclusion from this experiment is that AIs like GPT are very powerful and can potentially improve our work greatly. But AI literacy will be a necessity in the future. And with that, we must rethink how we work when AI becomes an integral part of our workflows. It's happening because in the next couple of months, you will see that an AI based on GPT-4 will be incorporated in your Microsoft Office suite. So your Word, your Excel, your Outlook, your PowerPoint, you can do that like what I did in your Office suite. All right. So, and then we should approach it with a positive mindset and see how AI can add value to our work and help us focus more on more important and creative things. And we must uphold our professional training, practice, knowledge, and identity. So with AI, a high level of professionalism will be even more important, will be important more than ever, all right? So back to the question, friends or foes, AI technology, are they going to replace us? I don't think so, but people who use AIs might, all right? So that ends my presentation. Back to you, Mila.
Sean, thank you very much. What a wealth of information and fascinating demonstrations of how you have used AI for materials development, glossaries, marking, and I like the message about not fearing that humans will be replaced by the machines, which brings us to our final panel member, Professor Stephen Doherty, educator, researcher, and Associate Dean, Education in the Faculty of Arts, Design, and Architecture. So, Stephen, building on what we have heard, how do you see the future for the development and application of technology, including AI? How do you see the impact on the future state of the profession? And later, maybe, time permitting, you could also tell us how what the university's position, what is the university's position on the use of technology in education?
Fantastic. Thanks, Ludmila. Hello, everybody. What a wonderful panel we've got. I love to see all the different experiences and opinions. It's really, really excellent to see all of that. Because often we're seeing it ourselves, what our colleagues are doing in the classroom, and it's a wonderful discussion and depth of knowledge, as you've just said, Ludmila. It's interesting looking at all of this, I find, because it's really nothing new in many ways, and we've experienced it time and time again, particularly in the translation industry with various technologies as they come through. Or some of you might have seen the term disruptive technology, and that was used for Uber and Airbnb and all of these different ways in which a tool or a technology, whether it's hardware or software, whatever it is, comes into a sector or an industry and disrupts or changes the status quo in that industry. And we saw that, if you want to go back a long time, we saw that with something as basic as the typewriter. But in more recent memory, we saw that in the 90s with the advent of translation memories, this idea that we would have software that could store our translations for reuse, could help us with terminology management and so on. When paired with the internet, we could use it to do research rather than using dictionaries. And then after that, machine translation and the different iterations we had and the different paradigms moving from rules-based, very linguistically rich, rigid systems to the more statistical approaches in the last couple of decades to the neural machine translation systems that we use in recent years. And all of these have shown us these very incremental gains, and have, to some form of another, disrupted the translation industry. And we've seen, and I know there are different opinions on the panel around replacing and not replacing. And I really like, Sean, your way of finishing off that the tool might not replace us, but somebody who can use the tool very effectively, they could indeed be a very competitive foe in the industry. But there are also these opportunities. So what we've seen at this time is yes, that sort of bulk translation where low quality general texts is needed has, to more or less of an extent, become more and more synonymous with machine translation. Whereas the specialized areas, particularly ones that require professional certification or accreditation, not so much. So the need for specialized subject matter expertise, the need to stamp, whether physically or digitally, to sign off on that, the legal aspects of having a human in the loop are there and appear to continue to be there. We've also seen opportunities in new kinds of roles across the industry in managing terminology, in post-editing, in new jobs that we haven't even seen before, or in localization, translation project management. And these are really attractive jobs as well. It's not all about, just post-editing all the time and for lower pay and repetitive tasks and so on. It's really wonderful to see particularly from our program here at UNSW, to see the really exciting positions that our graduates go into across the industry. And when we look over time, and this is some of the research that I've been doing in previous years, looking at the proliferation of jobs in the profession, we see many more and many different tasks that are there. And we often get tripped up in the terminology because these aren't typically called translator or interpreter anymore. They're often called, editor or bilingual project manager or terminologist or subtitler or captioner. They're very, very specific roles as that sort of move becomes away from the general into the more specialized. And I think that's where the really exciting pieces are now, and that's where the really exciting future is. So we see with AI tools more generally, including AI-based machine translation, a reduction or even removal of the lower level repetitive tasks. And I loved, Alisa, your example of saying, well, we know all of the issues MT has, but we know it gets things like numbers correct, right? Better than humans. And there are certain things there that we know are indeed very repetitive and not that interesting, but can be very, very interesting. And if we look back both in the academic literature, in government reports, and in even professional newsletters and what was happening in the profession across the decades that I'm talking about, in the 90s, in the 2000s, and then in the more recent years, we can also see this discussion happening with this fear or advent with translation memories, with machine translation, and now with these more substantial AI tools. And we've seen, much like Jia has mentioned, a really interesting analysis within universities looking at, well, when is the best time? What does it actually teach students, and why? And really getting to the point of understanding that, well, it would be a disadvantage to not teach students about these tools. And there's some really interesting work happening in various institutions. My own example is some work that I've been doing with Professor Dorothy Kenny in Dublin City University, where we looked at, as part of a European project, the development of different skills, monolingual skills, bilingual skills, technology skills, and so on, self-efficacy, in teaching students about statistical machine translation. And we tracked them over their studies. And this isn't a unique study. Many others have done so since then, but it really shows that we can actually, when done correctly, enhance the students' monolingual and bilingual skills by teaching them these technologies, not replace them. And of course, Jia's research is so interesting because the timing of that is obviously very, very critical. And I think moving into the chat GPT more broad discussion around AI in society, it's been fascinating watching in the last few months how the kind of hype, possibly hysteria in some places around chat GPT has played out. And I find it, such a good example of deja vu, and how a lot of the things that other colleagues in education, in marketing, in social media, in all of the different professions affected by ChatGPT have had that same kind of existential crisis as we've had in translation when dealing with machine translation. And a lot of it is actually quite similar. So it's been really interesting to see the same kinds of conversations playing out once again, but not just for translation this time, but more broadly to many different professions, in the legal, in the medical, in the education system, and so on. We can see, and you might have seen, I'm sure there are lots of sensationalist articles out there. Of one that stuck in my mind was back in January, where it was saying, well, using ChatGPT, a student can get a 70% average in their university degree. And I immediately kind of thought, well, what's that saying about our degree? First of all, I don't think that's true. I think that's a pretty boring degree if you're doing 4 years of essays, every single course, every single time. What does that say about how we're assessing and what we're assessing? And I think that's a really interesting description, if it is indeed true. But what would that person then do afterwards in the professional career, having essentially plagiarized or cheated the whole way through their degree? It would catch up sooner or later. But it raises some interesting questions. If an AI tool can replicate or so easily pass assessments in our courses, not just in universities, but in professional development, not just in translation, but in any discipline. Again, what does that say about how and what we are assessing? Surely we can replace assessment that is, essay-based, looking at citing and referencing, rather than having those being the majority of assessments. Are there ways that we can assess more authentically what people are going to be doing in their professional careers with live dialogues, role plays, presentations, and so on? So this push for authentic assessment is really, really interesting and something I personally am really excited about. But as I've said, something that in translation and interpreting, we've been doing for quite some time. And it's really interesting being able to share that knowledge and authenticity with other people in different disciplines, and not just in translation, as I've said. What's also really interesting is the different analogies that it comes into it, and how different disciplines are reacting to it. So I remember talking to some colleagues in science saying, well, it's very tricky for you because you're in a text-based discipline. And then lo and behold, ChatGPT could do mathematics and statistics and chemical equations. And that got a lot of attention in other communities, where a lot of these skills that we thought maybe were protected were also in that area. The same for art and design and architecture and fine arts and graphic design and things like that. There are a lot of AI tools out there that produce really very interesting and amazing art and generative AI art and things like that. And it's really interesting seeing different disciplines looking at it from different perspectives and going through what we've gone through in the various iterations of translation technology. That idea of an interesting analogy came up in some of these discussions of, well, what about calculators and word processing tools like Grammar Checker or Wordly? They're kind of the same aids to students when they're learning, whether it's text or with numerical skills and things like that. But as I mentioned, there are still needs across these sectors for accredited, whether it's teachers, lawyers, medical practitioners, and indeed interpreters and translators, because somebody has to essentially verify and sign off to give that, whether it's a rubber stamp or a digital stamp. There are many facets of the industry, not just in Australia, but internationally, where we're required to have a certified translator or interpreter for medical or legal and so on. There are also many areas in which we can't, due to copyright or confidentiality, share our data with ChatGPT, Google Translate, and so on. In fact, we see more and more clients explicitly forbidding in requests that it's shared with that. And there's some interesting projects happening in the European Commission looking at retractions and data, particularly medical records from medical research that have been translated using Google Translate. And in many cases, it's unfortunately people in other disciplines who haven't engaged with interpreters or translators who think, oh, I can just Google Translate that. And it has significant impact and even legal and ethical dimensions, as we've just mentioned before. And if I as a practitioner or we as a community are putting together projects or delivering translation and interpreting services, and it turns out that we shared confidential or copyright protected materials, ChatGPT, Google Translate isn't going to be there to take the blame or the legal ramifications for us. It's our name certifying that this is in fact our work and we have checked it and so on and so forth. You'll always see on all of these tools somewhere a liability disclaimer saying, we'll take your data, we improve our systems with it and so on. So it's very much a case of buyer beware, because our name is on that work after all, whether that's an essay, a translation, or even, as we've seen in Sean's examples there, an interpretation or a voiceover or something that could be recorded and shared more easily than ever before. That said, the reality is that these tools are ubiquitous, not just in translation and interpreting, but broadly in all aspects of it. And some institutions, including our own, have taken that approach that it's one of pragmatism. These are tools that are out there right now. People can use Google Translate on their phone, in the supermarket, on the bus. People can use ChatGPT so easily. And that's a reality. It's not something that we can pretend, well, hopefully people don't know about it and so on. That'll only get us so far. And it's becoming easier and easier to use these tools. The user interface and the prompts that Sean mentioned are easier to find online. So you even have now a sort of market for selling prompts, particularly in art, AI generated art and things like that. So it's a really interesting digital economy created behind this. So many organizations are looking at this from a very pragmatic point of view. As I said, yes, there are benefits, but there are also issues with training, with education, with product delivery, particularly in those specialized areas. And that's something that we need to keep up with. You'll see, and some of the comments in the chat mentioned, you'll see some companies and some sectors of the industry are really quick to embrace change, including the university sector, and really look at the positives and the opportunities or affordances of these tools. Others may take a long time. You know, if you've ever been in, you know, a police station or in a courtroom recently, you'll see that we're far from getting AI generated speech or speech-to-speech translation interpretation happening there. We're still struggling to do a remote meeting, or to have meetings or files being shared, or for interpreters to be given documents in advance of preparing for a trial. So there are lots of basics that haven't even happened yet in specialized areas. And I think this AI generated change will be far from having that impact in certain areas like that as it is in others, let's say online subtitles and caption, AI generated captioning and subtitles, as we saw earlier as well. We've barely adapted in some sectors to the technological innovations of the last decade, let alone in the last year. But to sum up, I think what's really, really important, whether we're in translation or interpreting, or in any other industry, in legal and medical professions, because you can see some really interesting conversations happening with ChatGPT. I saw recently a project of could ChatGPT be used to, in an inpatient setting, to take a patient history, for instance, and the ethical and issues of that. It does a very good job, I've got to say. I think it shocked a lot of medical colleagues. But just because a tool does something doesn't mean that we should just use it for the sake of using it. And we see in many areas this ethical, legal dimension as well. Just because we can do it doesn't necessarily mean we always should. But from an educational point of view and a continuous professional development point of view, what matters most, in my view, is that we remain informed, ethical, critical users who are able to advise clients, advise the public on these trends and these tools. We're able to employ them critically where we need to. Back to Alisa's example, sometimes it takes longer to post-edit than translate ourselves. We need to spot that before we waste those several hours doing that, and really be able to adapt and employ the different tools and technologies and see which ones work in different circumstances, and make the best of it. And this will change over time as we go. Technology is always going to change, and we need to be at the forefront of it. As Sean said, be that colleague or be that competitor who has that advantage or that competitive edge with AI to maximize the benefits and remove and reduce the negatives, or at least be aware of them. And I think that piece of advising clients and advising friends and colleagues about this is really, really important. Otherwise, we get removed from the conversation. People go to ChatGPT, to Google Translate, instead of accessing the services, whether it's medical, legal, translation, interpreting, and so on. And it's really, really difficult for us to have a voice and to influence policy and practice if we're not in that discussion. So I think that advocacy and visibility piece is really, really key, not just in translation, but more broadly with AI tools. Thanks, Ludmila.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for a very you know, the way I like a lot the way you synthesized what we've learned from the other panel members, but also the way you looked into the future and extrapolated the experience of using technology to other professions and education. So all of it is very valuable. So first, I would like to thank all our panelists. And had we been on campus, I would have invited you to give them a big round of applause. And in the remaining time, Sandra, would you like to read a few questions in chat so that we can open it to the audience? We don't have much time, but we have some time.
Thank you, Ludmila. Thank you to the presenters for excellent presentations and for covering so many different interesting topics, which I'm sure, can be expanded into full courses. So someone asked if we do have courses in translation technologies, and I said yes, and I put up the link there for you to look at. Stephen, I'd like to thank you for highlighting the ethical issues and the issues regarding copyright, because this is something that we need to stress, that as practitioners, we have to be ethical, and we can't just upload documents that are given to us in confidential, under confidentiality clauses on any of these platforms and create our terminology banks or anything like that. That is crucial. I'm sure we all work for highly confidential settings, and this is something that most people may not know. So this is a very important point that you raised. So the question of ethics. The other thing, I've got a few questions of my own. There are a few on the chat. I wanted to ask if the AI generated texts that Sean talked to us about are unique. So every time a text is generated, is it unique, or is the same text generated or similar text generated under similar instructions?
Yes, I've tried it a couple of times with similar prompts or even same prompts, but what I got are different in terms of the results. It could be slight differences. It could be very different.
Okay, that's good to know for training purposes. And the other thing is, well, the dialogues, interpreting, there's a long way before AI can compete with live interpreters. Even those dialogues, they lack all of the features of spoken language, and that's one of the things that we train our interpreters to keep, which is one of the difficult aspects of interpreting the manner, the discourse markers, the style, the hesitations, and if we're going to produce this type of text, we need to, as you said, Sean, we need to post-edit. So there are a few questions here. Someone is asking Alisa if she can recommend some AI subtitling software.
Thanks, Sandra, and thank you for the question. So the software I'm using now is provided by SBS, which is provided by TransPerfect. So I log on to the webpage and the AI is embedded in that webpage. And I want to echo what Stephen said about it's getting easier to learn technology. I definitely had that experience. So when I first joined SBS, I learned to use Swift, and it took me about a month to master the software. But with the one I'm using now by TransPerfect, it was like one day. It's so easy to use. Everything's clear, straightforward. So yeah, I would definitely recommend, looking for softwares available on the market and just kind of explore. It's not that hard and it's getting easier. Thanks.
Thanks, Alisa. And a related question is, what tools are commonly used nowadays for machine translation?
I would say there are proprietary ones and then there are freely available ones. It is the freely available ones that we need to be very cautious when we use them. As Sandra mentioned, when it comes to ethical practice and also confidentiality things. So all the major ones, Google, Bing Translate, and also even GPT. GPT is a huge language model. It's not a translation only model. It can do much more than translation, but it has that function built into it. But it's not necessarily give you better results. So it really depends on the situation. But the thing in the future to look out for is that a lot of this kind of AI technology will develop their API, so application programming interface, which can be embedded into different work technology like translation tools and things like that. And then subsequently, they can be used for different translation tasks and to facilitate different translation tasks or machine translation post-editing workflow. So this is something to look out for when you look into those type of job.
Okay. Stephen has already answered one question on the chat. Another one for Sean or two. What's the difference between ChatGPT and GPT-4? Can the previous one be capable of generating text like the ones you've shown? And then a follow-up question is the audio recordings. What software produced that?
Yes, so ChatGPT is a previous version of GPT-4. So GPT-4 is the latest iteration of the GPT technology, and by OpenAI. So it is the latest version, basically. So the difference is quite big because they just announced it last week. Because and you can see that the GPT-4 has. If you look at the different quotation, it has higher consciousness, so it's better at reasoning things. So it also built in has stronger capacity to identify images. So you can actually, if you give it a funny image, it can actually tell you why is it funny, okay, where is funny, and it can do better math and reasoning tasks. So GPT-4 is the more powerful version of the ChatGPT, basically. And in terms of the AI voiceover, and the one that I use are 11 Labs, and then there is a video editing tool called Chang. So that's from Microsoft. So Microsoft voiceover engine, you need to pay to use it, but if you use their video editing platform, you can access those voiceover engine for free. so that's a way to hack it, and that's how I got those accented, voiceover. 11 Labs is for free for individual use, but you only have about 10,000 characters per month in terms of content to generate some of the voice. But 11 Labs gives you the capacity to record your own voice, and then it will generate AI voice with your own voice. But that one is a little bit controversial, so you need to be very careful when you use it.
No one mentioned the use of machine translation and literary translation. I don't know who would like to take this one. Is there any application that you can use for literary translation?
I can speak to that a little bit. And so it's something that doesn't happen so much commercially. We're seeing more and more with these tools being used to manage terminology. Obviously, the kind of depth of the or the kind of the genre is very different. If we have, let's say, a Twilight teenage romance series compared to a Shakespearean play, it's going to be quite different. But it's happening more and more. A lot of the original research on it was around testing different language systems, but we're seeing it more and more in literary translation. But again, that's a very diverse field as well. I think maybe Alisa, did I see that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just like to share a bit of my experience translating a book by a Cambridge professor. So it was a book on economy, and she shared her view and insight on economy. So it's not 100% literary work, but it was a book with some literary components. And I used DeepL and MM Source when I was translating. And well, of course, I couldn't use everything that was done by the technology, but you'll be surprised to see how well, how good the translation are. And I could use some of them, quite a few of them were really good. So I would say just, to give it a go, it's not black and white whether we can do it or we cannot do it. Just, test it out, see which bits you can use, which bits you don't like. So it's like a combination of human and machine, like, the best of the both worlds.
People are asking for special certificates on machine translation and translation technologies, whether we're going to be offering any short courses, possibly, but also remember OSIT. OSIT offers PD, and we have actually conducted something with Sean and Stephen through OSIT. So that's probably something that can come up again. There's someone here saying it would be interesting to comparatively examine the differences in the translation product of students using AI translation tools through the tertiary studies and those students who have not been exposed to such tools. I don't know if Stephen, you would like to say anything about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really, really exciting. Ja, I think it might be a good point now. Could you tell us a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, about what you're thinking in the next couple of years? Because I think this is exactly the project that he's doing, and I think that the audience would love to hear about it.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I think so far there's actually there are already studies comparing the impact of machine translation. As I've mentioned just now, most of the time we are recruiting postgraduate students and we ask them to translate with the assistance of machine translation and then translate from scratch without the assistance of machine translation. We try to compare the processes and the products. So there's already a lot of articles investigating impact on this. But then what this question is about is that throughout the tertiary study. So that's exactly what previous literature lacked, because when we try to investigate the impact of those different kind of translation technology on students, it's most of the time a one-time experiment. We only ask them to translate with and without, and then we try to see how this has an impact on the processes and products. There aren't many that's more longitude that span across like 2 years or 1 year. I think it's an issue of the difficulty in carrying out research. So that's one thing that my work study, but it's very difficult. And in my study, I actually intend to implement a short training course to students and to see whether their performance will be improved before and after the training. And that training will last for around a month or so. I will teach them how to interact with machine translation, how to do post-editing, and hopefully after the course, we can see, I expect to see that those students receiving training will perform better before they receive training. Yeah, but then this is something, like I said, this is something lacking in study. We don't know whether over I think there's also another question about this, that over a period of time, will this have an impact on the students or not? This is something yet to be answered.
Thank you, Ja. Thank you, everybody. We've come to the end of our presentation. I think in conclusion, we can say that there is still a lot more to learn, and this will not stop here. The technology will keep developing, but I wouldn't lose sleep over being replaced by machines, because I don't think that will ever happen. We'll just have to make sure that machines work for us and we don't work for machines. So thank you, everybody. And before we go, we also wanted to give a plug to the new OSIT feedback form on the OSIT homepage to give feedback on your experiences on the implementation of the national recommended standards. So those of you who work in legal settings will be very familiar with the national recommended standards, and there is a new form for, this is your opportunity to report feedback, either positive or negative. And Ludmila, do you want to announce the next one, the next seminar? Or?
Yes, the next seminar is not of a type that might be of practical interest to translators. It is more of a linguistic presentation by the professor of Adelaide University, Gilhard Zuckerman, and he's talking about languages revival, including Aboriginal languages. So we will be advertising this seminar that will take place on the 4th of April. I think that's all from us. Thank you very much again to the presenters. Thank you, Sandra, and thank you to our very active and engaged audience. It was wonderful to hear from you all.